This is the next in the series of Biology Unit 5 revision videos, and in this one we're going to be looking at gas exchange, the human respiratory system and diseases of the human respiratory system. Now, aerobic respiration hasn't always been around in terms of life. Now, the very earliest forms of life, which were ancient types of bacteria, would have survived by undergoing anaerobic respiration. There were no oxygen within the atmosphere at the time, and this only occurred when some bacteria developed the ability to photosynthesize. Now, they would have then been able to produce oxygen, which would have then led to the evolution of aerobic microbes. Back then, when oxygen was released, this would have killed off a lot of the anaerobic bacteria. However, now we know that there are some bacteria that will still undergo anaerobic respiration, as there are aerobic organisms. And what you should remember from Unit 3 biology is that your muscles can respire anaerobically for a short amount of time. So what is aerobic respiration? Well, if an organism undergoes aerobic respiration, it has to get oxygen to the cells in its body. And it also needs to get rid of carbon dioxide, which has been produced by respiration. The body will exchange, or the organism will exchange these two gases, or oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. Now, this process is called gaseous exchange. Now, the reason that carbon dioxide needs to be removed from the body is that, for example, in humans, if it stays in the body, carbon dioxide is acidic, it will dissolve in the blood and will make the blood pH drop, which can denature enzymes and can be very deadly. Now, the first organism that we'll look at in consideration of the gas exchange is an amoeba. So an amoeba is a single-celled organism, and its gas exchange consists merely of oxygen and carbon dioxide diffusing in and out of the cell. So we'll get oxygen from the surroundings diffusing in and carbon dioxide diffusing out. Now, the reason that they can do this is that they have a really large surface area compared to their volume. So the gases don't have a long distance to go to be able to get in and out of the cell, and they also have plenty of area to do it in. So here we can see an earthworm, and we need to know about the gaseous exchange system of an earthworm. Now, although an earthworm has many cells compared to an amoeba, it is a multi-cell organism. It's very long and thin compared to its volume, so it has a comparatively large surface area to volume ratio. This allows the oxygen to diffuse in through the semi-permeable skin and the carbon dioxide to diffuse out. Blood within the organism will then carry the oxygen around to respiring cells and take the carbon dioxide from the respiring cells to the skin to be released into the air. Now, as you probably know, earthworms contain a lot of water. They don't have a waterproof skin, so what they do to prevent drying out due to this gaseous exchange is that they secrete mucus to be able to prevent drying out. And also, to prevent them drying out, they will tend to live in damp places, damp soil, for example. So here we have a frog, which is a type of amphibian. Now, most of the gas exchange on the frog happens through the skin. That's why they tend to live in damp places, similar to the earthworm. So oxygen will diffuse in, carbon dioxide will diffuse out. They also have this slimy coating that they can secrete mucus, similar to the earthworm, to prevent them drying out. Aside from this, they can also get oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide via simple lungs for when they're on land. The next organism that we're going to look at is fish, and their gaseous exchange takes place over the gills. So here on this photograph of a fish, we can see here are the gills. So what happens is the fish will take in water via the mouth and push it over the gills, and we'll look now at that in more detail. So here we can see that this is the gills. So we can see gill filaments here, the gill bar and the gill rakers. Now, as water is pushed over the gills, blood is also pumped from the heart to the gills. Now, these gills have a really large surface area due to having filaments. Each of these filaments has a really good blood supply. So as the fish is pushing water, gulping and pushing water over the gills, the oxygen that is dissolved in the water will diffuse into the blood in the gills, and carbon dioxide will diffuse from the blood at the gills into the water. This blood, now that's oxygenated at the gills, can then go to the rest of the fish's body. Now, it's really important to note that the way that the fish pushes the water over the gills, you need to know for the exam. So how it happens is it will gulp in the water and force the floor of its mouth up and force the water over the gills. And this slide here just summarises that in writing, so if you feel free to pause the video if you'd like to have a read at that. Do not get confused with respiration and breathing. They are not the same thing. Although the respiratory system is the lungs and that can be confused with breathing, they are not the same. Breathing is the act of taking in and out air into and out of the lungs. Respiration is gaining energy from glucose and oxygen to produce energy, carbon dioxide and water, so do not get them mixed up. Here we have a diagram of the lungs, and you need to know the different parts of the lung. So here, first of all, we have the trachea. That, as it goes down, that splits into two, and those are called bronchi. They split further into smaller branches, and we call those bronchioles. And then on the end of bronchioles, we've got these air sacs that we call alveoli. The entire structure is protected by ribs, the rib cage, and in between the rib cage we have intercostal muscles. And at the bottom of the lungs we have the diaphragm. Now these are really important when it comes to ventilation, and we'll look at that next. So breathing or ventilation actually happens in two sections. We've got breathing in and breathing out. Inspiration, breathing in, expiration, breathing out. Now during inspiration or breathing in, the intercostal muscles will contract, raise your rib cage up and push it out. The diaphragm will flatten, and this increases the volume inside of the chest. Now the air pressure in the lungs then will be lower than it is outside, so that will cause air to rush into the lungs. And during expiration or breathing out, the intercostal muscles do the opposite. They relax and lower the rib cage. The diaphragm relaxes and moves upwards. They reduce the volume inside the chest, so there's less area. The air pressure inside the lungs is large, whereas outside is low. So the air rushes out of the lungs and the alveoli will recoil back to the normal size, whereas in inspiration they will have expanded. However, not all the air in the lungs will leave the body. You will end up with some what we call residual air left in the alveoli, and this is just to make sure that the alveoli don't close up completely so that the air can't re-enter and we won't get gas exchange happening. Now you need to know about the alveoli and their adaptations. So alveoli are the structures in the lungs where gaseous exchange takes place. So at this point, with this blood supply, oxygen can enter the blood and carbon dioxide can leave the blood into the lungs and be excreted out of the body. Now the way that they are adapted is that they've got a very good blood supply, as we can see here. So we've got plenty of opportunity for diffusion in and out of the blood and into and out of the alveoli. The walls of the alveoli, as we can see here, are about 1 cell thick, and that allows for a short distance for diffusion to happen. And as we know from looking at diffusion osmosis, the shorter the distance, the quicker diffusion will happen. They also, when they fill with air, they will expand, they'll get bigger, and this increases the surface area by keeping them coiled up like this, so that when they do expand, there's lots of surface area for diffusion to happen across. Now, the entire respiratory system is open to its surroundings. Now, that puts it at risk of damage from chemicals and pathogens. However, it does have ways to protect itself, and that's what we're going to look at in this slide. So first of all, when you breathe through your nose, it has hairs that can trap large particles that you breathe in. The throat and nose, the cells that line it also secrete mucus, and that will trap smaller particles that manage to get past the hairs in the nose, and any pathogens like bacteria, viruses and fungal spores that get past that barrier as well. The cells of the bronchi and trachea have tiny hairs called cilia, and these will waft that mucus that's produced to the back of the throat. That can then be removed by either swallowing the mucus, which will take it to the stomach, and the stomach acid will kill any trapped pathogens, or by coughing, blowing your nose, getting rid of the mucus from the body entirely. Now, if any of these defences fail and pathogens do manage to get into the lungs, then white blood cells will attack those pathogens and try and get rid of them. Now, the main white blood cells that are involved in that in the lungs are macrophages. So next we're going to look at some types of respiratory diseases, and the first one we're going to look at is bronchitis. Now, this is usually caused by a virus or bacteria, but can be caused by breathing in particles of smoke. And symptoms include coughing, sore throat, wheezing and blocked nose. We can see here from this picture that this is due to the bronchi becoming inflamed and narrowing the airways to the alveoli. So people suffering from it find it difficult to breathe and will cough quite often also. Another respiratory disease is asbestosis. Now, this is caused by asbestos fibres that become trapped in the alveoli of the lungs. It's considered an occupational disease because people become exposed to asbestos fibres during work, from removing asbestos from buildings. Now, symptoms include inflammation and scarring of alveoli, and that can lead to difficulty in breathing, and also it reduces gas exchange within the lungs. It can also lead to cancer. The next one you need to know about is cystic fibrosis. Now, this is a genetic disease that is inherited from parents, and the symptoms are that the cells that line the throat and the bronchi are not working properly due to cilia not being hydrated enough. Now, this causes mucus to build up, as we can see here, and any pathogens that are trapped in this mucus can then cause an infection. It also reduces gas exchange because if it's lining the alveoli, then it's going to be difficult for gas to get in and out, and eventually this can damage the lungs. Now, lung cancer is caused by mainly tar in tobacco smoke, and the symptoms are as a result of the cells lining the bronchioles dividing uncontrollably and form tumours, which we can see in this photograph here. Now, the consequence of this is that it reduces the surface area for gaseous exchange to happen. So we've got loss of breath and catching breath. It causes chest pain and a prolonged cough, which can bring up blood. And lastly, we have asthma. Now, asthma can be caused by allergens such as pollen by breathing them in. It can be caused by an infection that the patient has. It can be caused by cold air, exercise and stress. Now, symptoms are that we get difficulty breathing, wheezing, tight chest. This can be treated with inhalers, bronchodilator drugs, which will widen the airways. Now, the linings of the airways become inflamed, and that causes a build-up of fluid, which we can see here. The muscles in the bronchi will contract and constrict the airways, and that's why it's difficult to breathe. And we can see that in this picture from a normal person to someone who is having an asthma attack. And that concludes the video that looks at the gaseous exchange in animals and humans and the problems that can occur in this system.